Section 47 of Library of the World's Best Literature, Ancient and Modern, Volume 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mary Agnew. Library of the World's Best Literature, Ancient and Modern, Volume 3, Section 47. Essay on Honoré de Balzac by William P. Trent, Part 2. Of all these stories, hardly one shows genuine greatness, except for the powerful tragic tale La Grande Bretèche, which is subsequently incorporated into Autres Études de Femmes. This story of a jealous husband's walling up of his wife's lover in a closet of her chamber is as dramatic a piece of writing as Balzac ever did, and is almost, if not quite, as perfect a short story as any that has since been written in France. La Maison de Chat qui Pilote has been mentioned already on account of its importance in the evolution of Balzac's realism. But while a delightful novelette, it is hardly great, its charm coming rather from its description of bourgeois life than from the working out of its central theme, the infelicity of a young wife married to an unfaithful artist. Modeste Mignon is interesting and more romantic than Balzac's later works were wont to be, but while it may be safely recommended to the average novel reader, few admirers of its author wish to have it taken as a sample of their master. Beatrix is a powerful story in its delineation of the weakness of the young Breton nobleman. Calyste of Juinet, it derives a factitious interest from the fact that George Sand is depicted in Camille Maupin and the nom de plume of Madame de Touche, and perhaps Balzac himself in Claude Vignon, the critic. Less factitious is the interest derived from Balzac's admirable delineation of a doting mother and aunt, and from his realistic handling of one of the cleverest of his ladies of light reputation, Madame Chansons. His studies of such characters in the demi-monde, especially of the wonderful Esther of Splendeur de Misère, serving plainly by way as point of departure from Dumas' Fille. Yet Beatrix is an able rather than a truly great book, for it neither elevates nor delights us. In fact, all the stories in this series are interesting rather than truly great, but all display Balzac's remarkable and analytic powers. Love, false or true, is of course their main theme, wrought out to a happy issue in La Bourse, a charming tale, or to a death of despair in La Grenadière. The childless young married woman is contrasted with her more fortunate friend, surrounded by little ones. Mémoire de deux jeunes mariés. The heartless coquette flirts once too often. La Belle de Cieux. The eligible young man is taken in by a scheming mother. Le contrat de mariage. The deserted husband labors to win back his wife, Honorine. The tempted wife learns at last the real nature of her peril, un fille d'Ève. In short, lovers and mistresses, husbands and wives, make us participants of all the joys and sorrows that form a miniature world within the four walls of every house. The scenes of provincial life number only 10 stories, but nearly all of them are masterpieces. They are Eugénie Grodin, Le Lit dans la Vallée, Ursule Mirouet, Pierrette, Le Curé de Tours, La Rabelais, La Vieille Fille, the Old Maid, the Cabinet des Antiques, the Cabinet of Antiques, Illustres Gaudissart, the illustrious Gaudissart, and La Muse de la Département, the departmental muse. Of course these, Eugénie Grodin is of course easily first in interest, pathos, and power. The character of old Grodin, a miserly father, is presented to us with Shakespearean vividness, although Eugénie herself has less than the Shakespearean charm. Any lesser artist would have made the tyrant himself and his yielding wife and daughters seem caricatures rather than living people. It is only the Shakespeares and Balzacs who are able to make their Shylocks and Lagos, their Grodins and Philip Biridots monsters and human beings at once and the same time. It is only the greater artists, too, who can bring out all of the pathos inherent in the subjugation of two gentle women to a tyrant in their own household. But it is Balzac, the inimitable alone, who can portray fully the life of the provinces, its banality, its meanness, its watchful selfishness, and yet save us through the perfection of his art from the degradation which results from contact with low and sordid life. The reader who rises unaffected from his perusal of Eugénie Grandet would be unmoved by the grief of Priam in the tent of Achilles, or of Othello in the death-chamber of Desdemona. Le Lys dans la Vallée has been pronounced by an able French critic to be the worst novel he knows, but as a study of more or less ethereal and slightly morbid love, it is characterized by remarkable power. Its heroine, Madame Mortsauf, tied to a nearly insane husband, and pursued by a sentimental lover, undergoes tortures of conscience through an agonizing sense of half-failure in her duty. Balzac himself used to cite her when he was charged with not being able to draw a pure woman, but he has created nobler types. The other stories of the group are also decidedly more interesting. The distress of Abbé Birotteau over his landlady's treatment, and the intrigues of Abbé Toubert, le curé de Tours, absorbed us completely as the career of Caesar himself in Mommsen's famous chapter. The woes of the little orphan subjected to the tyranny of her selfish aunt and uncle, Pierrette. The struggles of the rapacious heirs for the Mirouet fortune, Ursule Mirouet. A story which gives us one of Balzac's purest women, treats interestingly of mesmerism, and may be read without fear by the young. The siege of Madame Courment's mature affections for two adroit suitors, une vieille fille, the intrigues against the peace of d'Estrigeon, and the sublime devotion of their interests of the notary Chanel, le cabinet des antiques, and finally the ignoble passions that fought themselves out around the senile Jean-Jacques Rouget, under the direction of the diabolical ex-soldier Philippe Bridau, Les Roublés, sometimes entitled Un ménage de garçons, form the absorbing central themes of a group of novels, or rather stories, for few of them attain considerable length, unrivalled in the annals of realistic fiction. The Scenes of Country Life, comprising Les Paysans, Le Médecin de Campagne, Le Curé de Village, The Village Priest, take high rank among their author's works. Where Balzac might have been crudely naturalistic, he has preferred to be either realistic, as in the first-named admirable novel, or idealistic, as in the two latter. Hence he has created characters like the country physician, Dr. Benessis, almost as great a boon to the world of readers as that philanthropist himself was to the little village of his adoption. If Madame Graslin of Le Curé de Village fails to reach the height of Benessis, her career has at least a sensational interest which his lacked, and the country curate, the good Abbé Bonnet, surely makes up for her lack of the ideal side. This story, by the way, is important for the light it throws on the workings of the Roman Church among the common people, and the description of Madame Graslin's death is one of Balzac's most effective pieces of writing. We are now brought to Parisian scenes, and with the exception of Eugénie Grandet, to the best-known masterpieces, there are 20 titles, but as 2 of these are collective in character, the number of novels and stories amounts to 24, as follows: Le Père Gaudois, Illusions perdues, Splendeur et misère des courtisans, Les secrets de la princesse de Cardinal, The secrets of the princess of Cardinal, Histoire de 13, containing Ferragus, La duchesse de l'Angelaise, La fille aux yeux d'or, The girl with golden eyes, Sarrasine, Le colonel Charbet, L'interdiction, The interdiction, Les parents pauvres, Poor relations, including La cousine bête and Le cousin pont, La Messe de l'Enfer, The Atheist's Mass, Fascinant Crane, Balzac, La Maison Nucingen, Le Prince et la Bohème, The Prince of Bohemia, Esquisse d'homme d'affaires, Sketch of a businessman, Gaudissart II, Les Comédiens dans le Savoir, The Unconscious Humorists, Les Employés, The Employees, Histoire de César Bitourou, and Les Petits Bourgeois, The Little Bourgeois. Of these 24 titles, 6 belong to novels, 5 of which are of great power, 9 to novelettes and short stories, too admirable to be passed over without notice, 8 to novelettes and stories of interest and value which need not, however, detain us, and 1, Les Petits Bourgeois, to a novel of much promise, unfortunately left incomplete. Les Secrets de la Princesse de l'Accadian is remarkable chiefly as a study of the blind passion that often overtakes a man of letters. Daniel d'Arthez, the author, a fine character and a favorite with Balzac, succumbs to the wiles of the Princess of Cardigan, formerly the dashing and fascinating Duchess of Maufrigneuse, and is happy in his subjection. The Histoire des 13 contains 3 novelettes, linked together through the fact that in each a band of 13 young men, sworn to assist one another in conquering society, play an important part. This volume is the most frankly sensational of Balzac's works. La Duchesse de la Langez, however, is more than sensational. It gives perhaps Balzac's best description of Faubourg Saint-Germain, and one of his ablest analysis of the feminine character, while in the description of General Montiver's recognition of the Duchess in the Spanish convent, the novelist's dramatic power is seen at its highest. La Fille aux Yeux d'Or, which concludes the volume devoted to the mysterious brotherhood, may be considered, with Sarrasine, one of the dark closets of the great building known as the Comédie Humaine. Both stories deal with unnatural passions, and the first is one of Balzac's most effective compositions. For sheer voluptuousness of style, there is little in literature to parallel the description of the boudoir of the uncanny heroine. Very different from these stories is Le Colonel Chaubert, the record of the misfortunes of one of Napoleon's heroic soldiers, who, after untold hardships, returns to France to find his wife married a second time, and determined to deny his existence. The law is invoked, but the treachery of the wife induces the noble old man to put an end to the proceedings, after which he sinks into an indigent and pathetic senility. Balzac has never drawn a more heart-moving figure, nor has he ever sounded more thoroughly in the depths of human selfishness. But the description of the battle of Eylau and Chaubert's sufferings in retreat would alone suffice to make the story memorable. L'Interdiction is the proper pendant to the history of this unfortunate soldier. In it another husband, le Marquis d'Espard, suffers from the selfishness of his wife, one of the worst characters in the range of Balzac's fiction. That she may keep him from alienating his property to discharge a moral obligation, she endeavors to prove him insane. The legal complications which ensue bring forward one of Balzac's great figures, the judge of instruction, Popinot, but to appropriate him the reader must go to the marvellous book itself. Gobseck is a study of Parisian usurer, almost worthy of a place beside the description of old Grandet, while Les Employés is a realistic study of bureaucratic life, which, besides showing a wonderful familiarity with the details of a world of which Balzac has little personal experience, contains several admirably drawn characters and a sufficient amount of incident. But it is time to leave these sketches and novels in miniature, and to pass by the less important scenes of this fascinating Parisian life, in order to consider in some detail the 5 novels of consummate power. First of these in date of composition, and in popular estimation, at least among English readers, comes Le Père Goriot. It is certainly trite to call the book a French Lear, but the expression emphasizes the supreme artistic power that could treat the motif of one of Shakespeare's plays in a manner that never forces a disadvantaged comparison with the great tragedy. The retired vermicelli maker is not as grand a figure as the doting King of Britain, but he is as real. The French daughters, Anastasie, Countess of Restaud, and Delphine, Baroness of Nucingen, are not such types of savage wickedness as Regan and Goneril, but they fit the 19th century as well as the British princesses did in their more barbarous day. Yet there is no Cordelia in La Pale Goriotte, for the pale Victorine Telfeur cannot fill the place of that noblest of daughters. That is to say that Balzac's bourgeois tragedy lacks that element of the noble that every great poetic tragedy must have. The self-immolation of old Goriotte to the cold-hearted ambitions of his daughters is not noble, but his parental passion touches the infinite, and so proves the essential kinship of his creator with the creator of Lear. This touch of the infinite, as in Eugénie Grodette, lifts the book up from a level of merely masterly study of characters or a merely powerful novel to that of the supreme masterpiece of human genius. The marvellously lifelike description of the vulgar Parisian boarding-house, the fascinating delineation of character, that king of convicts, Vautrin, and the fine analysis of the ambitions of Rastignac, who comes nearer perhaps to being the hero of the Comédie Humaine than any of its characters, and is here presented to us at the threshold of his successful career, remain in the memory of every reader, but would never alone have sufficed to make Balzac's name worthy of immortality. The infinite quality of Goriotte's passion would, however, have conferred this honor on his creator had he never written another book. Illusions perdues and Splendeurs et Misères des Courtisans might also be regarded as one novel in 7 parts. More than any other of his works, they show the sun of Balzac's genius at its meridian. Nowhere else does he give us plots so absorbing. Nowhere else does he bring us so completely in contact with the world his imagination has peopled. The first novel devotes 2 of its parts to the provinces and 1 to Paris. The provincial stories center around 2 brothers-in-law, David Séchard and Lucien de Rubemempe, types of the political and the artistic intellect respectively. David, after struggling for fame and fortune, succumbs and finds his recompense in the love of his wife Eve, Lucien's sister, one of Balzac's noble women. Lucien, on the other hand, has some provincial successes as a poet, tries the great world of Paris, yields to its temptations, fails ignominiously, and attempts suicide, but is rescued by the great Vautrin, who has escaped from prison and is about to renew his war on society, disguised as a Spanish priest. Vautrin has conceived the idea that he can take no part in society. He will have representative in it, and taste its pleasures through him. Lucien accepts this disgraceful position, and plunges once more into the vortex, supported by the strong arm of the king and the convicts. His career and that of his patron form the subject of the 4 parts of Les Splendeurs et Misères, and is too complicated to describe here. Suffice it to say that probably nowhere else in fiction are the novel of character and the novel of incident so splendidly combined, and certainly nowhere else in the range of his work does Balzac so fully display his master qualities. That the story is sensational cannot be denied, but it is at least worthy of being called the Iliad of Crime. Nemesis waits upon both Lucien and Vautrin, and upon the poor courtesan Esther, whom they entrap in their toils, and when the 2 former are at last in custody, Lucien commits suicide. Vautrin baffles his acute judge in a wonderful interview, but with his cherished hope cut short by Lucien's death, finally gives up the struggle. Here the novel might have ended, Yet Balzac adds a fourth part, in order to complete the career of Vautrin. The famous convict is transformed into a government spy, and engages his immense power against his former comrades, and in defense of the society he has hitherto warred upon. The artistic propriety of this transformation may be questioned, but not the power and interest of the novel of which this is the finishing touch. Many readers would put the companion novel La Cousine Bette and Le Cousin Pon at the head of Balzac's works. They have not the infinite pathos of La Père Goriot, or the superb construction of the first three parts of the Splendeur et Misère, but for sheer strength the former at least is unsurpassed in fiction. Never before or since have the effects of vice in dragging down a man below the level of the lowest brute been so portrayed as in Baron Hulot. Never before or since has female depravity been so illustrated as in the diabolical career of Valérie Manef, probably the worst woman in fiction. As for the Cousine Bette herself, and her power to breed mischief and crime, it suffices to say that she is worthy of a place beside the two chief characters. Le Cousin Pon is a very different book, one which, though pathetic in the extreme, may be safely recommended to the youngest reader. The hero who gives his name to the story is an old musician who has worn out his welcome among his relations, but who becomes an object of interest to them when they learn that his collection of bric-a-brac is valuable, and that he is about to die. The intrigues that circulate around this collection, and the childlike German Schmuck, to whom Pons has bequeathed it, are described as only the author of Le Curé de Tours could have succeeded in doing. But the book contains also an almost perfect description of the ideal friendship existing between Pons and Schmuck. One remembers them longer than one does Fraser, the scoundrelly advocate who cheats poor Schmuck, in fact which should be cited against those who argue that Balzac is at home with his vicious characters only. The last novel of this group, César Birotteau, is the least powerful, though not perhaps the least popular. It is an excellent study of bourgeois life, and therefore fills an important place in the comedy, describing as it does the spreading ambitions of a rich but stupid perfumer, and containing an admirable study of bankruptcy. It may be dismissed with the remark that around the innocent Caesar surge most of the scoundrels that figure in the Comédie Humaine, and with the regret that it should have been completed while the far more powerful Les Petits Bourgeois was left unfinished. We now come to the concluding parts of Les Études Morales, the scenes describing political and military life. In the first group are 5 novels and stories: L'envers de l'histoire contemporaine, the underside of contemporary history, a fine story, but rather social than political; Une ténébreuse affaire, a shady affair; Un épisode sur la terreur, The Marquas, and Le Député d'Arcis, the Deputy of Arcis. Of those the episode is probably the most admirable, although The Marquas has not a little strength. Le Député, Les Petits Bourgeois, was continued by M. Charles Rabaud, and a considerable part of it is not Balzac's, a fact which is to be regretted, since practically it is the only one of these stories that touches actual politics as the term is usually understood. The military scenes are only 2 in number, Les Chouans and Un Patient dans le désert. The former of these has been sufficiently described already. The latter is one of the best known of the short stories, but rather deserves a place beside La Fille aux Yeux d'Or. Indeed, for Balzac's best military scenes we must go to La Colonelle Chabert, or to Adieu. We now pass to those subterranean chambers of the great structure we are exploring, Les Études Philosophiques. There are 20 in number, 4 being novels, 1 a composite volume of tales, and the real stories. The titles run as follows: Le Pot de Chagrin, L'Élixir de Longue Vie, The Elixir of Life, Melmoth Réconcilié, Le Chef d'œuvre Inconnu, The Anonymous Masterpiece, Gambara, Massimilia Doni, Le Réquisitionnaire, Adieu, El Verdugo, Les Maranads, L'Auberge Rouge, The Red Inn, Un drame du bord de la mer, a seaside drama, L'Enfant Maudit, a child accursed, Maître Cornelius, Master Cornelius, Sur Catherine de Médicis, La Recherche de l'Absolu, Louis Lambert, Séraphita, Les Proscrits, et Jésus-Christ en Flandre. Of the novels, La Peau de Chagrin is easily first. Its central theme is the world-old conflict between the infinite desires and the finite powers of man. The hero Raphael is hardly, as Madame Barrière asserts, on a level with Hamlet, Faust, or Manfred, but the struggle of his infinite and finite natures is almost as intensely interesting as the similar struggles in them. The introduction of the talisman, the wild ass's skin, that accomplishes all the wishes of its owner, but on condition that it is to shrink away in proportion to the intensity of those wishes, and that when it disappears the owner's life is to end, gave to the story a weird interest not altogether, perhaps, in keeping with its realistic setting, and certainly forcing a disastrous comparison with the three great poems named. But when all allowances are made, one is forced to conclude that Le Pot de Chagrin is a novel of extraordinary power and absorbing interest, and that its description of its hero's dissipations in the libertine circles of Paris, and its portrayal of the sublime devotion of the heroine Pauline for her slowly perishing lover, are scarcely to be paralleled in literature. Far less powerful are the short stories on similar themes, entitled L'Élixir de Longue Vie and Melmoth Réconcilié, Melmoth Reconciled, which gives us Balzac's rehandling of the Don Juan of Molière and Byron, and the Melmoth of Mautrin. Below the Peau de Chagrin, but still among the author's best novels, should be placed La Recherche de l'Absolu, which, as its title implies, describes the efforts of a chemist to prove by chemical analysis the unity of composition of matter, in the pursuit of his philosophic will-o'-the-wisp. Balthazar Claes loses his fortune and sacrifices his noble wife and children. His madness serves, however, to bring into relief the splendid qualities of these latter, and it is just here, in its human rather than its philosophic bearings, that the story rises to real greatness. Marguerite Claes, the daughter, is a noble heroine, and if one wishes to see how Balzac's characters and ideas suffer when treated by another though able hand, one has but to read in conjunction with this novel Les Maîtres Guériens, of the distinguished dramatist Émile Augier. A proper pendant to this history of a noble genius perverted is La Confidence de la Rêverie, the second part of that remarkable composite Sur Catherine de Médicis, the book which, in spite of its mixture of history, fiction, and speculative politics, is one of the most suggestive of Balzac's minor productions. Concerning Séraphita and Louis Lambert, the remaining novels of this series, certain noted mystics assert that they contain the essence of Balzac's genius, and at least suggest the secret of the universe. Perhaps an ordinary critic might content himself with saying that both books are remarkable proofs of their author's power, and that the former is notable for its marvelous descriptions of Norwegian scenery. Of the lesser members of the philosophic group, nearly all are admirable in their kind and degree. Le Chef d'œuvre Inconnu and Gambara treat the pains of the artistic life and temperament. Massimiliano, like Gambara, treats of music, but also gives a brilliant picture of Venetian life. Le Réquisitionnaire, perhaps the best of Balzac's short stories, deals with the phenomenon of second sight, as Adieu does with that of mental alienation caused by a sudden shock. Les Maranads is an absorbing study of the effects of heredity. L'Auberge Rouge is an analysis of remorse, as is also Un drame au bord de la mer, while L'Enfant Maudit is an analysis of the effects of extreme sensibility, especially as manifested in the passion of a poetic love. Finally, Maître Cornelius is a study of avarice, in which is set a remarkable portrait of Louis XI. Les Proscrits is a masterly sketch of the exile of Dante at Paris, and Jésus Christ en Flandre is an exquisite allegory, the most delicate flower, perhaps, of Balzac's genius. It remains only to say a few words about the third division of La Comédie Humaine, viz., the Étude Analytique. Only two members of the series, the Physiologie du Mariage and Les Petits Mesurés de la Vie Conjugale, were ever completed. They were not great enough to make us regret the loss of Pathology of Social Life and the other unwritten volumes, for the two books we have are neither novels nor profound studies, neither great fiction nor great psychology. That they are worth reading for their suggestiveness with regard to such important subjects as marriage and conjugal life goes without saying, since they are Balzac's, but that they add greatly to his reputation, not even his most ardent admirer would be hardly enough to affirm. And now, in conclusion, what can one say about this great writer that will not fall far short of his deserts? Plainly nothing, yet a few points may be accentuated with profit. We should notice in the first place that Balzac has consciously tried almost every form of prose fiction, and has been nearly always splendidly successful. In analytic studies of high, middle, and low life he has not his superior. In the novel of intrigue and sensation he is easily a master, while he succeeds at least fairly in form of fiction at just the opposite pole from this, to wit, the ideal, le lit dans la vallée. In character sketches of extreme types like Gobseck, his supremacy has long been recognized, and he is almost as powerful when he enters the world of mysticism, whither so few of us can follow him. As a writer of novelettes he is unrivaled, and some of his short stories are worthy to rank with the best of that his followers have produced. In the extensive use of dialect he was a pioneer. In romance he has La Peau de Chagrin and Le Rechercheur de l'Absolu to his credit, while some of the work in the tales connected with the name of Catherine de Medici shows what he could have done in historical fiction had he continued to follow Scott. And what is true of the form of his fiction is true of its elements. Tragedy, comedy, melodrama are all within his reach. He can call up tears and shudders, laughter and smiles at will. He knows the whole range of human emotions, and he dares to penetrate the arcana of passions almost too terrible or loathsome for literature to touch. In style, in the larger sense of the word, he is almost equally supreme. He is the father of modern realism, and remains its greatest exponent. He retains always some of the good elements of romance. That is to say, he sees the thing as it ought to be, and he avoids the pitfalls of naturalism, being a painter and not a photographer. In other words, like all truly great writers, he never forgets his ideals, but he is too impartial to his characters, and has too fast a grip on life to fall into the unrealities of sentimentalism. It is true that he lacked the spontaneity that characterized his great forerunner, Shakespeare, and his great contemporary, George Sand, but this loss is made up by the inevitable and impersonable characters of his work, when once his genius was thoroughly aroused to action. His laborious method of describing by an accumulation of details postponed the play of his powers, which were at their height in the action of his characters. Yet, sooner or later, the inert masses of his composition were fused into a burning whole. But if Balzac is primarily a dramatist in the creation and manipulation of his characters, he is also a supreme painter of his presentation of scenes. And what characters and what scenes has he not set before us? Over 2,000 personages move through the Comédie Humaine, whose biographies M.M. Surfbert and Christophe have collected for us in their admirable Répertoire de Comédie Humaine, and whose chief types M. Paul Flat has described in the first series of his Essais sur Balzac. Some of these personages are of course shadowy, but an amazingly large number live for us as truly as Shakespeare's heroes and heroines do. Nor will any one who has trod the streets of Balzac's Paris, or spent the summer with him at the Château des Ages, Les Paysans, or the beautiful valleys of Touraine, ever forget the master's pictures. Yet the Balzac who with intangible materials created living and breathing men and women and unfading scenes has been accused of vitiating the French language, and has been denied the possession of verbal style. On this point French critics must give the final verdict, but a foreigner may cite Taine's defence of that style, and maintain that most of the liberties taken by Balzac with his native language were forced on him by the novel and far-reaching character of his work. Nor should it be forgotten that he was capable at times of almost perfect passages of description, and that he rarely confounded, as novelists are too apt to do, the provinces of poetry and prose. But one might write 100 essays on Balzac and not exhaust him. One might write a volume on his women, a volume to refute the charge that his bad men are better drawn than his good, a volume to discuss Mr. Henry James's epigrammatic declaration that the 5-franc piece may be fairly called the protagonist of the Comédie Humaine. In short, one might go on defending and praising and even criticizing Balzac for a lifetime, and be little further advanced than when one began. For to criticize Balzac, is it not to criticize life itself? End of section 47. Recording by Mary Agnew.